I think there's a lot of value material in this book on information, something that we've been trying to grapple with for the last 20 years. The delivery of information, agro-met information particularly, to farmers. We've made substantial progress, but we are still a very long way from delivering value-added information on a real-time basis and getting people to change their patterns of behavior in relation to information. Giving information is one thing, but actually getting farmers in this case to change their traditional habits of sowing in response to the information is something else. So I think that's a very useful material that's been presented in this book on information. I found the discussion on climate change very, very useful because not very many people agree on all aspects of climate change. There's still a lot of, contrary to what you might think, the science is not all that robust. But on one issue, the conclusions are in fact incontrovertible, and that's the rise in mean sea levels. And therefore, coastal areas, the vulnerability of coastal areas is no longer a subject of dispute even in science. What this means is for the peninsular states of India particularly, 300 million population living in the coastal areas, they will be subject to increased vulnerability on account of the increase in mean sea levels. In my previous job, we had started a project, the Integrated Coastal Zone Management Project, which actually involves delineation and demarcation of a hazard line for the first time in India. And we're doing this, it's going to take 2 years' time, but it's already created a backlash. You know, people are fearing that they're going to be relocated away from the areas they're living in to outside wherever the hazard line finally gets identified. But I think this is going to be a very, very important issue for us. Increasingly, our industrial facilities and infrastructure facilities will have to be located in coastal areas, because water is the binding constraint in many of our industries. If you take power, for example, it's not so much land, or it's not so much anything, it's the availability of water that is going to increasingly determine siting of power plants. So the pressure that is going to come on our coastal areas, not just from existing population, not just from traditional livelihoods, over 7 million people living depending on fishing for their livelihoods, for instance, but increasingly even the shift of infrastructure in the coastal areas is going to introduce a fair amount of pressure. And therefore, I think some of the recommendations and some of the discussions that are there in this book on climate change particularly, and what it means for the design of cities is going to be particularly important. Bombay, for example, is a prime example of a city that is, you know, it's an island city actually, one of the few island cities that we have. The way we manage the coastal areas is going to be very, very crucial. We've got a new coastal regulation zone in force, but I think jury is still out whether this is actually going to lead to better management. There's no shortage of master plans, but as I said, the real challenge is to translate the preparation of these master plans into actual behavior as far as populations are concerned. We have institutions, and I entirely agree with the author that it's not enough to have institutions. The NDMA, the National Disaster Management Authority, in the formulation of which I had an important role to play, because tsunami had just struck and we were all at our wits' end as to what is to be done. Former Home Minister and I spent hours and we discussed the architecture of the National Disaster Management Authority at that time. Shashidhar Reddy was also part of that. And we've got an institution in place. We've got an institution, as Shashidhar was explaining, institution at the national level. We have institutions now at the state level, at the district level. But having created these institutions increasingly will be called upon to take on a much more active role in anticipating disasters, in planning for disasters, in managing natural disasters, and so on. So I think the basic institutional infrastructure appears to be in place. We have a large network of scientific institutions which are engaged in some form of anticipatory planning as far as natural disasters are concerned. But all this has to be made part of a cohesive role, so that the main message from the book that you can actually prevent disasters in a more cost-effective manner, then respond to the disasters after the disasters are struck. I think if I get it right, that's the one-line message that I take away from the book, which is that with intelligent planning, the smart infrastructure, the type that we saw, finance ministers will end up spending much less than waiting for the disasters and then responding to the disasters. So I think shorn of the 4 I's and the 4 P's and the 3 R's, that's the simple message that I take with me. I congratulate the author, as I said, it's very well written. A lot of reference material. I learned a lot from it, even though I'm not directly associated with the subject. But one thought did strike me after reading the book, which is to use the National Rural Employment Guarantee Act more creatively than it has been in the past, to build resilience in local communities. We haven't been successful in this. And you know, we are spending 40,000 crores a year. That's a huge amount of money to be putting in. And I think one thought that struck me was, can we somehow introduce a window in the National Rural Employment Guarantee Act to build resilience with local communities? I think that's the one policy prescription that struck me. In the next few days, I'll have discussions with the NDMA, and I'll talk to people like Mihir, who have got a lot of experience in this area. And I hope that we would be able, at least in the vulnerable areas, at least in some of the coastal areas and in some of the hilly regions of the country, which are visited by natural disasters ever so frequently, maybe we can make a beginning. And I think it's worth trying, because we have the resources that are being put into place. All it requires is a much more intelligent choice of projects by local institutions who have the responsibility for implementing the Rural Employment Guarantee Act, and then providing the technical backup for ensuring that these systems are put in place. So I think adaptation to climate change and creating resilience to natural disasters is certainly one priority item for reform as far as the National Rural Employment Guarantee Act is concerned.